Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I've got two tags to share with you, adding splatter without splattering. I've also sharing some tips for stamp layering with the Altenew Stampwheel. So let's get started. I'm using the Golden Days stamp set from Altenew today. I absolutely love this flower, I just think it's so pretty. There are a few different layers to it as well as the leaves. So I've got my Altenew stamp wheel here and I'm adding some cardstock into the bottom left hand corner. This is classic Crest £110 solar white cardstock. And I'm taking the first layer of the stamp, this is the outline, and I'm just placing that down onto the cardstock. So I've added the cardstock in the bottom left hand corner. That is so that if I need to remove it for any reason, it's gonna I know it's going to stamp perfectly fine in the same place if I want to double stamp it. But there is that sticky mat inside of this stamp wheel, and that is also holding that cardstock in place. I've got an enamel dot on the bottom of my flip plate here, and I'm going to share why I only have one enamel dot on it. When the stamp wheel came out, lots of people kind of shared how they use it, and we were kind of recommended possibly to put an enamel dot in each of the corners of like the square stamp wheel. I have just got one at the bottom, and I'll share why a little bit later, like as I'm going along, why for me it's helpful just to have the one. But I've inked up this first layer with Obsidian pigment ink. This is a really beautiful dark black pigment ink from Altenew. I am stamping that twice just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression. And then I am going to clean off the stamp. I'm not doing it perfectly, but I just want to make sure that I don't accidentally get ink where I don't want it. And then because this is a pigment ink, I am going to heat set it, just so that the ink doesn't smear when I add the other layers on top. So I've added that back into the bottom left hand corner, and then I'm going to take the next layer of this flower. So I'm just lining it up. I did have to get my head like right over, but I did cut that out of the video because you don't want to see the back of my head. I'm then rotating the clear plate so that I can then pick up the next stamp. So this time the enamel dot is on the right hand side. I'm then going to ink up the stamp. So I'm bringing in the new colours of fresh dye ink from Altenew. This is the Sweet Dreams collection. It's one of my absolute favourites, and they've now brought it out in the round ink pads. So these are the full size ink pads. I like that they're actually a little bit smaller than kind of traditional full-size ink pads. I've always gone with cubes, but actually I really like these round ones. So just inking up that stamp really well with the Dewdrops ink. And these new kind of ink pads have a higher viscosity to the ink, so they do work really nicely for stamp layering. But I did end up stamping each of the layers twice just to make sure that I got a really nice impression. The inks do take a little while to dry, so I probably could have left it and it would have been fine, but I do really like to have good coverage of the ink, so I decided to ink it up twice. And when I flip over this plate, I'm making sure that the enamel dot is on the right hand side. So as long as I know where that enamel dot is supposed to be, I know that I'm putting the plate in the right position. So I'm just cleaning off that stamp. And then with the ink pads, it's difficult to see on camera, but there's a notch at the top of the ink pad and also at the bottom of the ink pad. And if you line those both up, line them up basically correctly, then you can turn the ink pad and they close really nicely, but otherwise sometimes it is a little bit tricky. So now I can rotate that flip plate and I'm going to have the enamel dot at the top. So I'm just picking up the next layer of the stamp, and this one I'm inking up with Aqualicious ink. So again, just inking that up really well, and then I can stamp that down, making sure that enamel dot is at the top of the plate. And then again, I'm going to stamp it twice just to make sure that I get a really nice impression of that ink. Again, cleaning off the stamp, and then I can line up the last layer of these petals. Rotating the plate again so that the enamel dot is on the left hand side. Picking up that stamp, and then I'm inking that up with the Teal Cave ink. So for me, I just find it so much easier having the one enamel dot and kind of rotating it around the stamp wheel. You can definitely not have to do it like so far apart, but again, it was just easier for me to kind of think, oh, at the bottom, on the right hand side, at the top and the left. So I've kept all of those stamps in place, and now I'm going to stamp them for a second time with different colours of ink. So the idea is that because all of my stamps are already in place, I can stamp the next layers really, really quickly. I have sped this video up because otherwise it would take some time to sort of show everything. But in real life, it was really quite quick. I'm next using the Red Sunset Fresh Dye ink bundle. This is another new one. And these colours I didn't actually have in the original inks, so it's really nice to have these new ones. And this is a beautiful kind of coral colour. So the first layer was using blush. The second layer is using rouge. Although I'm just doing the one kind of extra colour rather than the first one I did, I could just do this multiple times because it's so easy once all of the stamps are in place. And then for the last layer, I'm using crimson. So you can see there I wasn't 100% sure where I wanted that plate to be. So I looked for the enamel dot and I knew I needed it on the left hand side. I decided not to add the flower centres to the flowers. I think they look really nice as is. So I left that out. And that's the great thing about stamp layering. You don't have to add all of the layers if you don't want to. I recently made a card with a lily and I kept the leaves black and just did the colour on the flower itself, and I loved how it looked, so I thought I would do the same thing for these tags. So I'm just inking up one of the kind of middle layers of the leaves, so not the most solid layer, one that's got a little bit of white space. And I'm inking those up with the same Obsidian pigment ink that I used on the outline of the flower. I'm just stamping those twice, again, just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression. And then I could flip the plate around and stamp kind of like upside down, but I have found when using the stamp wheel, I do prefer to actually stamp closest towards me rather than kind of further away. So I just rotated that cardstock. I want 2 sets of leaves because I'm making 2 tags today. So just popping that plate back into the stamp wheel base and then stamping those down. And I do set those aside to dry. Next, I'm taking the coordinating dies, holding them over the images with some low tack tape, and then I can run those through my die cutting machine. Next, I've cut 2 tags from white cardstock using the Altenew Terrific Tags die set. And I want to add some interest onto these tags, so I thought I would add some splatter. But being a clean and simple stamper, I don't love splatter. Well, I love the look of splatter, I just don't like splattering myself sometimes because I feel like I can't really control it too much. And if I just want it in a couple of places, I'm probably unlikely to manage to do that. So I'm taking these 2 stamps. They are from the Altenew Inky Lily set, and they they are splatter stamps, so the work is already done for me. I'm just figuring out here where I want them to be placed. A lot of the splatter is going to get covered up by the flower, but it's kind of just going to peek out a little bit. So inking those up with Obsidian Pigment ink again. I wanted all of the kind of black stamping to be the exact same tone of black, so I'm just using the same black ink for all of it. So I've stamped one, and then I can pop the next tag in and stamp the other one. And then for some added stability to the tags, I have cut another 2 tags from the white cardstock, and I'm just adhering those back to back. Not only is this going to give me some stability to the tags, but it's also going to make sure that the back of them is really nice and clean. I've then added some foam tape onto the back of the flowers. And then I'm kind of just placing those onto the tags without adhering them down. And then I can bring in the leaves and add some glue tape onto the back of those, making sure to only add the adhesive just towards the top of the leaves, because I know that they're going to overhang the tags and I don't want adhesive showing on the back of the tags. So I can just pop those underneath the flower. And then I can just pop that one up at the top. I'm not pressing down at this point, just in case I need to rearrange anything. And actually I did decide to rearrange that top leaf there on the right hand tag. I can then remove the backings off of that foam tape. So I'm just pressing down with a piece of printer paper there onto the tags. I wasn't 100% sure if the ink had completely dried. It had, but I didn't want to get my fingerprints in it and smear it at this stage. So then I can just pop my flowers on top. Just using the tweezers there to help me get the backing off of that foam tape, and then place those down onto the tags. I've then stamped a sentiment from the Altenew Bold Sentiment set. This is one of my favourites. And I have stamped that with Obsidian Pigment ink again, and then cut those into strips. And I'm just placing those down onto the tags with more foam tape. And then to finish off the tags, I'm adding some black twine through the top of the tags, securing it in place at the front, and then I can tie that in a bow. I really love how these tags turned out. I like having the kind of black and white base, sort of with the splatters and the leaves, and then just having that pop of colour on the flowers themselves. So just fiddling around with that bow for a little while, and then I can cut those tails down. And that is the tags finished for today. I really love just having that tiny little bit of splatter just poking out the sides of those flowers, but I haven't had to worry about the placement of the splatter because I used those stamps. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.